Wait. All right. Hello, space fans, and welcome to another exciting edition of This Week in Space. I am your host with the most, Jonah Emerson Bell. I'm a consulting astrologer and tarot reader, as well as a mental health counselor. And I like to show up here every Monday morning at 11-ish Mountain Time to tell you all what's going on in the celestial spheres for the week. Yeah, we've got a pretty jam-packed show as everybody and their mother has decided to move into Aries. So we'll be talking about that this week, as well as the Aries new moon and a couple other aspects that are active this week. Before we jump into the astrology, a couple announcements. I will be co-facilitating an Oracle Dream Retreat in Greece. That's going on May 8th through the 15th. And in this retreat, we'll visit several ancient sites to explore the precognitive power of dreams. I will be doing this with Sarah Janes, who is a mythologist and dream worker and really awesome person, really good taste in music, and yeah, a couple other co-facilitators. And Sarah usually gets really good people to come along on these things. I believe the first one is starting right now in Epidavros, and I got some posts on my feed talking about this if you are interested, or you can follow at Sarah Jane's Dreaming on the Instagrams. And if you want some more information, you can go to themysteries.org to check it out. And yeah, I would love to see y'all in Greece because it's going to be awesome. Also, you may or may not know this, but I do an astrology themed radio show called the Melee Report, which is very much like this show, except for more rock, less talk. And I like to put those out for the new and full moons. And God willing, I will have enough time this week in my busy wizarding schedule to put out one of those radio shows. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You can follow along with the show on SoundCloud. My account is Camp Wizard Camp over there, or you can join Patreon and get that show delivered to your inbox each and every week. You can go to Patreon/ Camp Wizard Camp to sign up, and you get the radio show for like $3 a month. And you also get the coveted track listings. So something to look forward to. Also, I put a link in my stories on Instagram, and there's a link in my bio if you want to just access it through there. All right, I think that is all of the advertisements that I have. So let's jump into this week in space. We are looking at the week from April the 13th, which is today, to April the 19th of 2026. All right, y'all ready for this? So this week, things get pretty spicy. We have the Sun, Chiron, the Moon, Saturn, Mars, Neptune, and soon Mercury, all in the Mars-ruled sign of Aries. So, all of these planets are being resourced by Mars and operating in a somewhat martial type of way. We also have the new moon in Aries occurring on Friday the 17th. And as Mercury enters Aries on Tuesday, it kind of adds to the pressure in Aries. So we will have all of these seven planets all stacked up here, which is bringing a lot of focus and intensity to the cardinal fire sign of Aries. And I've seen a lot of people on the internet talking about how this is going to be like the most intense week of 2026. And I don't really know if I see that. But I mean, at this point, kind of anything is possible. Like, who knows? And there's definitely a lot of heat and friction being created in Aries this week. And Aries can be impulsive and it brings a lot of energy to the party. And it also won't shy away from a conflict. But I don't know if this necessarily means that things are going to be bad or any more overwhelming than at other points of this year. And there's a lot of emphasis on individuality with all these planets in Aries and struggling against obstacles that are presented to us in order to get a better understanding of ourselves and what our limitations are. And I also want to point out that on April 7th, which is 2 days before Mars entered Aries, and Mars was in a decan that they rule at the last 10 degrees of Pisces, Shamel Abdul Karim set fire to a paper products warehouse where he worked in Ontario, California. And in a post that he made of himself lighting the fires, he repeatedly said, all you had to do was pay us enough to live. And although Mars was still in Pisces when that fire started, the Sun, Chiron, Neptune, and Saturn were all in Aries at that time. And this is some Aries shit right there. Aries is cardinal fire. And as cardinal fire, Aries starts fires. And in this case, it happened not just as the warehouse fire, that was the first ignition point. It also started a fire on social media, akin to when Luigi Mangione allegedly off the CEO of United Health, which occurred as Mars was opposing Pluto, by the way. And the phrase, all you had to do was pay us enough to live, which I respect that, has kind of the same power to it that delay, deny, depose does. And this warehouse fire is now sparking conversations about wealth inequality, wage stagnation, and the consolidation of resources and by corporations and individuals at the expense of everyone and everything else on the planet. Is also an expression of collective rage at the current state of class inequality in this country. And so, following the torching of the paper products warehouse, several other fire-related incidents occurred around America, including several fires set at the Ontario Mall on April 10th, which was the day that Mars moved into Aries. And early in the morning that same day, somebody threw a Molotov cocktail at the owner of OpenAI, Sam Altman's house. And also on Friday, there was a massive five-alarm fire in a warehouse in College Point, Queens. And I don't think the cause of that fire has been determined yet, but here is another kind of ignition point as Mars moves into their rulership in Cardinal Aries. And I feel like this paper warehouse fire was a catalyst that sparked other fires and other fire-related events. At least two of them are related to class inequality and inequity. And so, as the ruler of Aries comes back home, we are seeing collective rage creating a spark through the friction with class struggle, economic power imbalances, which are igniting the kind of dry tinder of everybody who is fed up with the conditions of our current system. And I tell you what, it's beginning to look a lot like a parable of the sower around here. Also, on Saturday, April 11th, a man attacked a U.S. military airplane with a hatchet at Shannon Airport in Ireland. And the man got through the perimeter fence and climbed up on the wing of a C-130 Hercules military transport plane and began chopping it up with an axe, which is like pretty bold. And so, what does this last one have to do with starting fires in the sign of Aries, you might ask? Well, I'm about to tell you. The first decan of Aries is ruled by Mars, and the image of this decan is a dark man with a large, restless body wielding an axe. And for those of y'all who don't know, the decans are 10-degree segments of the zodiac. So each sign has three decans. Each decan has a ruler. The first decan of Aries is ruled by Mars, and the all of these decans have images that go along with them. And again, the first decan of Aries is a dark man with a large, restless body, depicted with red eyes, wielding an axe. And so, in his book 36 Faces, which is about the decans, Austin Coppock uses the axe as the symbol for the first decan of Aries. He writes, "The axe is the primordial splitter. the first and still best tool for creating two out of one. Life on all levels requires this division for growth. Kopic, Kopic continues saying, the raw assertion of individual being found here has several magical uses. It may be tapped in order to sever contracts and break bonds which no longer serve. One might also direct this force to a portion of their environment which is out of control, which kind of seems to be the case here. There's a power to bring subjective order to the world, to chop down trees, to cut a path through the jungle. As demonstrated by some of the traditional lore on this Deccan, the raw power which burns here can also be turned on an enemy to dire effect. And it seems like the individual who tried to dismantle a military plane with a hatchet was kind of embodying this archetypal energy of the first face of Aries. Yo, what's up? Nice to see you. So, anyway, that little preamble brings us into this week. Monday, April the 13th, we have Venus in Taurus, sextile Jupiter in Cancer. So let me share my screen and bring this up for the folks on the YouTube. Okay, great. This around. That out of the way. Okay, so we have Venus over here at 16 degrees of Taurus in a sextile aspect to Jupiter in who is exalted in Cancer over there at 16 degrees and 40 minutes. This blue line right here with the asterisks in it is the symbol for the sextile. So getting back to my notes. Okay, so kicking off this week, we have this helpful transit. We have Venus in domicile in Taurus, forming a supportive sextile with Jupiter, who is in their exaltation in Cancer. So in this transit, we have both of the benefics in places where they are pretty well resourced and forming a supportive aspect with each other. The sextile is not a very strong aspect, and it kind of takes some work to activate it. However, there may be a feeling of ease today or a sense of pleasantness, which I think is quite welcome given the chaos of the world right now. And, I'm a little late getting my show started today because I was like, you know what? I'm going to take it easy. Venus is sextile Jupiter. I don't need to rush for nothing. And like the 10,000-year-old man said, never run for a bus. There will always be another. So today there's this opportunity to kind of allow the good to be good. So see if we can turn towards what's working in our lives and allow this to be a resource to support us. Because things are going to become more intense as the week progresses and planets begin to stack up in Aries. This transit is good for relationships of all kinds. And this is a good time to kind of lean into our relationships as an area of support and a time to share joy with those that we are close with. Jupiter is expansive, and Venus loves to be in connection. So, this transit gives us a chance to expand that sense of connection and to find expansion through relationality. Jupiter is a planet of wisdom, and with this sextile, we can kind of increase our understanding and our wisdom through being in connection with others. Venus in Taurus is all about what feels good, appreciating the sensual pleasures of life and celebrating what we value. Jupiter helps us to learn and grow from the things that we appreciate and from the places that we find beauty and joy in our life. It may be difficult to find joy in these stressful times, but this transit reminds us to try and find the joy and beauty in the simple things and to recognize what is good around us and to share that sense of what's good with others. And as we practice this, it helps us to build our capacity and to access resources that can help us to develop resilience and provide a reservoir of support that we can draw on when things feel a bit more challenging, which moves us to Tuesday, April the 14th. Let me just switch this chart around. Okay. On Tuesday, April the 14th, we have Mercury in Pisces, sextile Uranus in Taurus, at 29 degrees and 24 arc minutes at the very edges of these signs. In fact, Mercury will move into Aries right after this transit perfects. And so for the folks at home, we have Mercury right there in the anaretic degree of Pisces and the sextile with Uranus over here at the anaretic degree of Taurus. So Mercury and Uranus both love novelty, innovation, new ideas, and new experiences. As they come into a sextile with each other, we may get access to exciting new information or tap into a sense of inspiration. This transit can herald new discoveries as well as innovative ideas. We may find that we encounter new people or tap into new interests around this transit. And again, a sextile is not the strongest of aspects, so this transit may not provide any shocking new insights, but we may notice a little glimmer, a new opportunity, a new idea beginning to form. And we might have to take some time to stop and cultivate this idea so it can take root and grow. Uranus is associated with the idea of the genius. And traditionally, the genius was a spirit that went where it was welcome. It is not a person. There is no person who is a genius. We are all vessels that the genius comes to visit and channels its information, insight, and wisdom through us. So no one possesses the genius. Rather, it would move from place to place, whispering its ideas into the ears of those who were open to hear what it had to say. If one was not available to receive what the genius had to offer, it would move off to the next person who might be a better vessel or channel for the gifts that the genius had to offer. With Mercury sextile Uranus, I think about this idea of the genius. And we may want to consider the ways we can make space for this spirit and to receive what it has to offer. If we are too busy to jot down the seed of an idea as it is dropped into our mind, it might quickly fade or get lost in the shuffle of life. If you can catch a spark, perhaps take a moment and see if you can cultivate it a little bit so it can become a fire. This transit provides the opportunity for new ideas and inspiration to arise, new situations to be born. But in order for that to happen, we have to do our part. We have to allow the space and catch the fragments of the ideas and inspiration and find ways to kind of nurture them so that they can be something that is more fully formed and take on the energy to become something tangible and constructive as we work to develop them. So, also, Tuesday, April the 14th, we have Mercury entering Aries. And let's go back to the chart. Let's move this ahead a couple hours. Where are we at? Oh, there we go. So there we go. Mercury entering Aries early in the morning on let's see here. Mercury entering Aries late at night, early in the morning on the 14th or the 15th. So right after Mercury perfects their sextile with Uranus and they catch a little bit of spark of insight, they move into cardinal Aries and begin to kindle that idea into a flame. Mercury in Aries is quick-witted. Their thinking is sharp. They love to argue to get their point across. As cardinal fire, Aries is all about starting fires, and Mercury here will say some shit that just ignites things. So kind of be aware of that. We may find ourselves in heated conversation, or someone may say something that ignites something within us, for better or for worse. You know, it can ignite inspiration or passion, or it can ignite passion and anger. So try not to lose your head or get thrown off your game if somebody says something off the cuff that activates you and gets you all fired up. However, with Mercury and Aries, argument and debate is the preferred form of communication. It is a way that Mercury here likes to transmit and receive information. And there's also an optimism that Mercury in Aries has, is able to see the potential of what things can be and what we are capable of doing. And I think this optimistic mental picture allows us to navigate challenges and setbacks because there is a greater ability to hold the image of what things can be and what can be possible. Um, Raven Caldera writes about Mercury and Aries as the Egyptian myth of Horus in their book Myth Astrology 1, or Volume 1. And the myth of Horus is the myth of the divine child, born from the magic of his mother Isis and the remembered parts of his father Osiris. His, his role is to return the world to balance through confronting his uncle Set, who is an archetype of disorder and a god of chaos and storms. Horus's role is to bring order back to the world through the confrontation with this chaotic force. And this is what Mercury in Aries does, bringing order to chaos through the ways that we process and communicate information. In this Mars ruled sign, Mercury is quick witted and sharp tongued. It can cut through disordered thinking or muddy situations with clear insight. If it doesn't get carried away by strong emotions, which further contribute to the confusion and chaos in oneself. And I love thinking about Mercury in Aries as the divine child who is born from what is remembered. We can think about this as the ability to use the information of our personal and collective histories to make new choices that break old cycles and begin to carve new pathways, both mentally and in our experience in the world. Okay, that brings us to Thursday, April the 16th, when we have the Sun in Aries conjunct Chiron in Aries. This is occurring at 26 degrees and 38 arc minutes. Oh, thank you, Amy. I'm glad. Let me pull up the chart for this. Let's see here. Ah, there we go. Okay, right here we see the Sun and Chiron conjunct, and then all of these planets just stacking up in Aries, so much so that my program had to sort of extend the lines of that sign. Little ominous looking, but let's get into this Sun Aries conjunction. So on Thursday, we have the Sun Chiron conjunction. The sun is a symbol of our individual identity. It is a representative of day consciousness and the rational and the logical, as well as our inner spiritual wisdom. Chiron is a symbol of the core wound. And once we learn to accept and integrate these wounded parts of ourselves, uh, we unlock something that allows us to help others through our own personal experience, as well as to step into a more empowered version of ourselves. And one of Chiron's roles in mythology was as the teacher of heroes. And I think Chiron has kind of been pigeonholed into the wounded healer archetype, which has its benefits and I think is important. But I think one of the roles of Chiron in Aries is reclaiming this idea of the teacher of heroes. And so, as the sun, who is exalted in Aries and is a symbol of the heroic, conjuncts Chiron here, it illuminates this part of the Chiron archetype. Chiron was the teacher of Jason, who is very much associated with the sign of Aries, as well as Hercules, Asclepius, Achilles, and many other Greek heroes. And when we think of the heroic, we often think of the rugged individual, American action star who does it all on their own. However, Chiron was a centaur, half human, half horse. And part of his wisdom is the integration of the rational, logical human half and or the yang part of the identity with the intuitive, relational yin part of the personality. And this integration was something that he tried to impart on his students. Of course, many of them didn't listen, but all you can do is try. Chiron was also a centaur, which centaurs are pack animals. And Chiron's core wound was one of abandonment and the feeling of othered and or the feeling of otherness and being apart from. His wisdom, which was a boon to his students, also positioned him as an outcast from the centaur community. Chiron sought to heal his wounds on his own through his personal knowledge instead of reaching out to others or being held in the embrace of his community. And this is something that we might want to consider as the sun, which is a symbol of the unique individual, conjoins Chiron. And we may consider how the myth of rugged individualism and self-reliance has created deep wounds in our culture. This old story has separated people from their environments, from themselves, and from each other, and has in some ways pitted us all against each other under the guise of resource scarcity or the belief that there isn't enough to go around. The role of the hero was not to go out and achieve or conquer on his own or on their own, but was to be of service to the communal good. When this principle was overtaken by the myth of the individual against the world, I think we really lost something. We lost touch with the core of what it means to be heroic. Ursula K. Le Guin wrote a beautiful little piece called The Carrier Bag of Fiction. It's incredibly short, really beautiful. Love her. The essay opens talking about prehistoric humans and how most of what they ate was foraged fruits, nuts, and vegetables, as hunter-gatherers. They didn't work very much and, had enough to sustain on, and there was a lot of free time. And she theorizes that early humans who kind of got bored in all of this free time went off mammoth hunting to fill their spare time and to find some excitement in their lives. She writes, "It's hard to tell a gripping tale of how I wrested a wild oat seed from its husk, and another, and then another. And then I scratched my gnat bites, and Ool said something funny, and we went to the creek and got a drink and watched newts for a while. And then I found another patch of oats. No, it does not compare, cannot compete with how I thrust my spear into the titanic hairy flank, while Oob, impaled on huge sweeping tusks, writhed, screaming, and blood spurted everywhere in crimson torrents." She continues by saying, we've all heard all about all the sticks and spears and swords, the things that bash and poke and hit with the long, hard things, but we have not heard about the thing to put things in, the container, for the thing contained. That is the news story. That is the news. What Le Guin is describing is two different forms of narrative, two different ways of experiencing, perceiving, and being in the world. One individualistic that exerts energy outward, the other collective that contains and holds energy and brings it back home. And I think this is the key to Chiron and Aries being conjoined and illuminated by the sun. A reconsideration of the ideal of the heroic and the ways that the story of the hero that directs energy outward through spears and swords has hijacked our collective ability to hold the resources that we have, to hold communities together, to maintain connection, and to connect with a sense of home and belonging. That has all been superseded by a desire to kill a mammoth, to tell a good story, and to be perceived as unique. With this conjunction, we may take some time and reconsider what it means to be heroic now, and what type of hero is needed in these present times. And what we need now, I think, looks very different from what it looked like in the past. Because in many ways, it was that past version of the heroic that has kind of gotten us into the situations that we're in now. Another thing that I want to touch on, as long as we are talking about core wounds, is the core wounds of America. And America has their natal Chiron at 20 degrees of Aries. And America had its Chiron return last year. Over the weekend, I did a family constellation, and the facilitator was talking about Bert Hellinger, who is the founder of that work. And according to him, Hellinger believed that the core wounds of America was, or one of the core wounds of America was immigration and displacement. And this is a nation of immigrants. Everyone who lives here, with the exception of the Native Americans, came here from somewhere else. And in doing so, they left their homes, their culture, their language, their connection to the land, the foods that they ate, the extended family, basically everything that they knew, and everything that formed a container to hold them. In arriving in a new land, they had to assimilate quickly. And in doing so, they created adaptations to survive. These adaptations can look any number of ways. They might include only speaking English and abandoning one's native tongue, separating from cultural practices in favor of embracing a new culture, or cutting off the past, suppressing vulnerability or cutting off roots. These adaptations can create dysfunctions in family systems. As successive generations receive the legacy of separation from their ancestry and culture, the descendants can unconsciously play out the suffering, struggle, and isolation of their ancestors who left their homelands to make their way in a new world, or may unconsciously carry on the adaptations of survival, which may suppress sensitivity and deny vulnerability. And the indigenous people of America were also impacted and traumatized by immigration and settler colonization. They too were cut off from their roots and traditional practices, separated from their land, language, and ancestral homes, so that the arriving settlers would have a place to go and resources that they could extract. And these practices still continue today. And the settlers, in many cases, who were traumatized and oppressed in their homelands, arrived here and played out their trauma on Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, moving from victim to oppressor and continuing to perpetuate cycles of trauma on the people they saw as other, less than, or inhuman. And this is one of the core wounds of America. It is a land of people who live in separation, who have been separated from the container of ancestry and culture, lost touch with the carrier bag of tradition and rootedness in favor of the heroic myth of the rugged individual who is carving a path on their own, pulling themselves up by their bootstraps and making something of themselves. And these survival adaptations separate us from each other and also from ourselves. And I don't even know how to heal this wound. I don't think I don't, and I think I could take the next 45 minutes trying to talk about it, but maybe it's not about the solution. Maybe with the sun illuminating Chiron today, it's just about recognizing and being with what comes up. Maybe it's not about fixes or progress at this moment. And Lord knows the myth of progress is part of what got us to where we are, for better or for worse. Maybe it's just about turning towards and being with, and having the capacity to hold and to be held without having to fix or solve or change or improve. So, that also on Thursday, April the 16th, we have Mars in Aries, sextile Pluto in Aquarius. This is occurring at 5 degrees and 25 arc minutes. And so we have Mars here, right in between Neptune and Saturn at 5 degrees. And that is in a sextile to Pluto over here at 5 degrees of Aquarius. So we got another sextile this week. Pluto, underworld god, who represents the power of the unconscious, as well as the suppressed and repressed survival drives and the urges that may not fit into normative or polite society. Mars is a planet of action. It is motivated to act through desire and to go after what it is hungering for. When Pluto and Mars aspect each other, the Plutonian subterranean desires motivate Mars to act and to fulfill them. In this sextile, Mars provides kind of an outlet for the unconscious energies that Pluto holds. And this can look on any number of ways. Because this is a more harmonious aspect, it may be less jarring than harder aspects like squares, conjunctions, or oppositions. And ideally, we are able to bring some consciousness to what we are doing and why. And what are the underlying motivations that are driving us to act? If we can succeed in bringing awareness to our motivations, then we can consider what is the most skillful way to act in order to achieve what we are trying to accomplish, whether that is blowing off steam or moving forward in some area of our lives. As Pluto and Mars come into a collaborative aspect, some of the suppressed rage that Pluto holds around issues of power imbalance, inequality, and the general state of the world may seek to find release through Mars and martial action. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we are already seeing this with warehouse fires and hatchet attacks to military aircraft. And this transit may cause some unprocessed rage and frustration to surface and to seek to find an outlet through direct action. So, oh, let me pour myself a little more beverage. So, Pluto is connected with power, and the sextile with Mars can create motivation to gain power or to achieve some form of success or advancement. And there's nothing wrong with this, but Mars is connected with the will and the ego. And we want to take a moment and be like, is this an ego-driven thing, or is there maybe a better use or a better way that I can relate with this energy? And so we want to consider our actions today and to consider their impact on others. If we just try and will ourselves forward without thinking about the impact of our actions, we can create some messy situations or end up making enemies that we will have to contend with down the line, which may be ultimately a waste of energy and time in the long run. Pluto is also a planet of initiation. It pulls us into the underworld and strips things away and composts parts of ourselves and old patterns that have run their course to make space for what can possibly come next. And ideally, a successful navigation of the realm of Pluto grants us access to the treasures that Pluto holds in the unseen regions of the underworld. And I have heard it said that Pluto only destroys what is destructible. And thus, what is left after a Pluto transit is what is truly indestructible. So Mars has a way of picking fights or accepting challenges that can end up being bigger than what they had bargained for, which pulls Mars into an initiation that they had never intended on accepting. So as these planets come into this sextile, that Mars energy may cause us to start conflicts or take action that ends us pulling us into some form of initiation or something bigger than what we intended, which may not have been what we wanted when we sent that strongly worded text or decided to go after the object of our desire. So that's just something to be aware of this week. Also, Thursday, April the 16th, we have Mercury in Aries forming a conjunction with Neptune in Aries. This is occurring at 2 degrees and 47 arc minutes. And so coming back to the chart, we have Mercury, who has just entered Aries, right there with Neptune at 2 degrees. So, one of the issues with our current world, as I see it, is a lack of imagination. As Mercury, who is a trickster god and a planet of thought and communication, conjoins Neptune today, who is a planet of imaginations and dreams, perhaps we can practice some imagination. Maybe we can envision a new story, dream a new dream that helps us to shake us out of these old cycles of power and domination, of resource hoarding, of othering, of death and destruction. Returning to Ursula K. Le Guin's carrier bag theory of fiction, she writes, maybe the trouble is we've all let ourselves become part of the killer story, and so we may get finished along with it. Hence, it is with a certain feeling of urgency that I seek the nature, subject, words of the other story, the untold story, the life story. Love that. As Mercury, planet of communication, meets the vast imagination represented by Neptune, can we begin to form a new narrative, one that is a bit more creative? One of the roles of the trickster, and Mercury is a trickster, is to push on the edges of reality until they kind of shift and reshape themselves. So perhaps we can envision a story that does just that, or try a new way of communicating, one that moves free of the constraints of language, which limits meaning through vocabulary and oftentimes filters thought and emotions through the monoculture of what a language can and cannot convey through its linguistic limitations. In many ways, language and the world, in many ways, language and the words that we know is what shapes our understanding and our perception of the world. But as Mercury conjoins Neptune, there is an invitation to allow ourselves to dream into the limitless expanses of our knowing, a knowing that transcends language, a wisdom that transcends the individual. As Mercury meets Neptune here, it allows us to access the collective unconscious, the information that is shared, the field that we are embedded in, which may defy language, just like dreams defy language. The information transmitted in dreams operates through feeling and image. And when we try to kind of drag that back into the day world and pin it down with language, it becomes brittle and always falls short. With this transit, there's an opportunity to kind of lean into that dream wisdom, the dream knowing, to let go of the logical or the desire to contain and transmit these images or senses through the frail envelope of speech, but to be with them and to learn from them in the dream's own territory, not the daylight or not on the daylight or rational mind's terms. And one of the Neptunian myths that I really like, and I think really applies here, is the myth of Proteus. And Proteus was a prophetic sea god. And to receive his prophecy, you had to grab him and hold him fast. And Proteus would shift into all manner of shapes and forms, lions and fishes and squirrels and grand pianos and pickles and whatnot. And one had to keep holding on to him until he got tired and returned to his true form, at which point he would provide a prophecy. And so too it is with dreams and or visions. We just have to hold on to them without fear or judgment, allowing them to shift and change until they return back to their true form and supply us with a prophetic vision or a little bit of truth we can carry with us as we once again move out into the world. And this is something to consider with Mercury's conjunction to Neptune, to lean into that shifting vision until we arrive at an image that can spark the imagination and kindle a new story that can lead the way into the uncharted dark. Which brings us to Friday, April the 17th, when we have the new moon in Aries, which is occurring at 27 degrees and 28 arc minutes, and will be happening at 4:51 a.m. Pacific time, making that 7:51 a.m. on the East Coast. Excuse me. Let me see if I pull up that chart. Ah, there we go. All right, so yep, we got this new moon over here at 27 degrees, conjunct Chiron right there at 26 degrees, and then again, all this stuff happening in Aries. So, my friends, Aries, like I've said, is cardinal fire, and its role is to start fires. It is a sign of ignition and activation. It begins things, carves out new territory, it fights to claim space for itself. In mythology, it is connected to the story of Jason and his quest for the Golden Fleece. And that story is all about Jason, who is one of Chiron's students, by the way. And Jason has his throne usurped by an evil uncle after his father dies. And to prove that he is the rightful king, he needs to go on a quest to retrieve the Golden Fleece, which hangs in a garden, which is sacred to Mars, which is guarded by a serpent that never sleeps in a land far, far away. And the whole tale of Jason and the Argonauts is about Jason needing to both receive help from others as well as stepping into his ability to be a leader. He doesn't trust that he is worthy to lead his crew, which is basically the expendables of the ancient world. Like all of the heroes sign up to be on the Argos, to be part of his crew. And Jason, as a young kind of youth, is like, oh, I can't lead these people. They're so much cooler than me. And a lot of it is Jason needing to step into a leadership role. And also, Jason cannot complete his quest on his own. He needs help from all of these heroes, and he really needs the assistance of Medea, a witch, who helps him to retrieve the Golden Fleece. And I'm saying all this because these are like really core themes of the Aries archetype: the quest for belonging, the desire to attain the Golden Fleece, which bestows the right to rule or the right to sovereignty, the thing that makes it okay for me to be me, which is guarded by this serpent that never sleeps, symbol of hypervigilance and fear that coils around that which we most desire, the thing that bestows the right to be ourselves and the right to exist. And this is the battle that Aries is always waging, the struggle against fear to claim its place in the world. And to do this, Aries needs help. It requires assistance. At the very least, it requires others to belong with, because in a vacuum, there is nothing to belong to and nowhere to belong. So, if we consider the new moon as a seeding moment, we may want to think about the battles we are choosing or the quest that has chosen us and what we are fighting against so that we can claim our place in the world, and also what we are fighting for. We also might want to consider the ways that we access and practice courage. And like the serpent coiled around the golden fleece, there is no courage without fear. They are two sides of the same coin. And without a sense of fear to overcome, we are just being headstrong, egotistical, or plain dumb. In this way, fear helps to keep us right sized and in alignment. So we may also want to consider our relationship to fear and how that informs the ways that we practice courage and how we choose to take action in the world. We also may want to consider the fires we are starting and how we tend to them. Aries can just go around setting things on fire, but fire requires fuel to keep going and oxygen to breathe. And if we don't feed the fires that we start, they burn out. And with all these planets in Aries, there is a high potential for burnout. So it's important to think about what we actually want to start or ignite and if we are capable of sustaining it. I also mentioned that Jason was Chiron's student, and this new moon is conjunct Chiron. So I think there is also an element of connecting with our teachers and mentors. This may be internal or external. The people who have come before us who can help us to consider the skillful use of energy and right action, as well as the ways that we can integrate both of the active parts of ourselves, both the active and passive parts of ourselves, the logical and the intuitive, and the ways we may need to face our own wounds in order to achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves, and to accept ourselves as having the right to exist and to take up space in the world, which moves us along to Sunday, April the 19th. There's on Saturday the 18th, we have a Mercury sextile Pluto. I'm going to skip over that for the sake of time because there's already a lot going on. So we'll move to Sunday, April the 19th, when we have Mars in Aries, conjunct Saturn in Aries at 7 degrees and 51 arc minutes. And let me throw that up on the chart for the folks at home. Give me one second. Uh, there we go. Okay, so Saturn and Mars over there in Aries at 7 degrees. We also have Mercury right there, kind of getting our thoughts going about the limitations to our actions that the Saturn Mars conjunction may bring. So let me start off by saying Saturn is in their fall in Aries. And this whole Iran war debacle is a prime example of Saturn in their fall. Saturn in Aries tells a story that might makes right. And this is the underlying narrative of the US jumping into this war and Trump's unhinged threat to destroy an entire civilization last week. The story that Saturn in Aries tells is I have the bombs and you will do what I say or I'm going to crush you. However, Saturn has a lot of trouble here in this Mars ruled sign because Saturn is into planning and is focused on the long-term goal, the great work, and sustainable structures and systems that can withstand the test of time. In the fast-paced and impulsive sign of Aries, Saturn doesn't really have time for any of that, so they end up jumping into things and feeling ill-prepared and getting in over their heads because their systems are shoddy and their structures are rushed. Case in point, the war with Iran. The US government just jumped into that one, not thinking, or they just jumped into that one thinking that with the might of their firepower, it would be over in a few days. But somehow no one considered what was actually going to happen or why no one has tried to invade Iran for the past 40 years. And so Iran did what was obvious to anyone who took a minute to think about it, and they closed off the Strait of Hormuz. And now global energy prices are skyrocketing. And the Trump administration's goal for this war keep changing from regime change to eliminating a nuclear program, which they already said they eliminated when they bombed Iran last summer. And now it's shifting to opening the Strait of Hormuz. And now they're saying they're just blockading the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know. It's chaos. And the strait wouldn't have been closed had they not started this pointless war. And this is textbook Saturn in Aries. And now it's stuck, trying to dig itself out from the hole that it just impulsively jumped into, and in this case, created for no good reason. And all around it, systems are unraveling, from the gutting of the federal government, the elimination of government programs, to angry, underpaid workers who are setting fire to their shitty jobs. And now Mars, ruler of Aries, comes into conjunct Saturn in their fall. Since Mars entered Aries on April the 9th, they have been activating the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. They conjoined Neptune last Sunday, April the 12th, and this week they are carrying that energy forward to meet Saturn. And I said last week, Mars is a trigger and it activates planets and points in space. And this week, Mars is continuing to activate that very charged conjunction. And as Mars meets Saturn, we have an interesting conflict. Mars is kind of like the gas pedal, and Saturn's like the brake. Mars is impulsive and into instant gratification, and Saturn is restraint and likes delayed gratification. Mars is action, Saturn is the consequences of our actions. Saturn sets up walls and boundaries and fortifications, and Mars storms the castle. The tension between this stop and go energy can be really frustrating, like trying to drive with the brake on. And Saturn can be a limit or an obstacle. And Mars can either beat their head against the wall or work within the confines that Saturn creates to channel their energy in skillful and disciplined ways. Or it can get frustrated and just try and blow everything up. Also, with Mars moving between Neptune, which is dissolving and draining, and Saturn, which is limiting and heavy, we may be feeling really low energy this week. We may have the desire to take action or to get things done, but we may lack the motivation to do so, which again can create frustration. Or with that Sun conjunct Chiron, create and with Mercury conjunct this Mars Saturn conjunction, it can create internal stories about our inherent worth or activate the inner critic who may berate us for not doing enough. So just be aware of that and be aware of the stories you're telling yourself about your energy levels and your ability to achieve things. And again, with all these planets in Aries, there is the potential for burnout if we use up all of our fuel. And this also, it is not lost on me that this also applies to the macrocosm. And with Mars conjoining Saturn, if we are just kind of revving our engine with the brake on, it's going to burn up all the fuel and fry our engines. So watch out for that this week. There also might be power struggles or feelings of being limited in some way by external systems or circumstances. And Mars's first response is usually to push back or fight against. Mars loves a challenge and does not take kindly to being told no, especially in their own home. And so, coming off the sextile with Pluto earlier in the week, there may be deep feelings of rage that are brewing and seeking release. And again, we want to see if we can work with Saturn instead of against it to find productive ways to channel that energy and to see if we can enlist Saturn in helping us to consider the long-term end goal and how we can use our energy to move towards that goal instead of just flipping out, melting down, or breaking stuff out of frustration. Saturn is famous for swallowing his children. And although he never swallowed Mars, who is Zeus's son and well, comes later, there is still the Saturnian urge to suppress what feels too big, uncontrollable, or what feels threatening to the status quo. In another cannibalism myth, Zeus swallows Metis, who is the god of wisdom, and then he gets a splitting headache. So Hephaestus, who is the god of blacksmithing and metalcraft, who I associate with the creative aspects of Mars, splits Zeus's head open with an axe. And Athena, the goddess of strategy and victory, is the victory in battle is born. And so, again, with the axe. And with these myths, we see the kind of problematic nature of trying to swallow or suppress certain energies. And with the latter myth, we also see creativity as a way of releasing some of the energies that feel too big for our system to hold. And, the axe here, the symbol of the first face of Aries, and a symbol of splitting and separating from old forms or undifferentiating and smothering connection to create space for individuality and something new to come into being. And in this case, Zeus sought to be the sole possessor of the wisdom of Metis, and he couldn't contain it. And so Hephaestus's creativity split Zeus and separated the wisdom principle from the being that sought to own and control it. And a new form of wisdom was born, a strategic wisdom, which is something we are in dire need of these days as it seems like everything and everyone is just in survival mode, which I think is part of the energy of Aries. As the first sign of the zodiac and the first sign of spring, Aries is about struggling to carve out a place for oneself and fighting to survive. Perhaps as Mars meets Saturn, some of that energy can be rerouted into some longer term thinking about skillful uses of our energy and a little bit of strategy to help us shift out of outdated survival narratives. Saturn is also the consequences of our actions. And so with this transit, there may be some reaping of what we have been sowing and the consequences of our past actions beginning to take shape. Just something to pay attention to as we are feeling the martial desire to take action. Remember that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, so just consider that this week. And then on Sunday, April the 19th, we have the sun entering Taurus, which, I think provides a sense of grounding and also a tending to the fires that have started or the seeds that were planted in Aries. But I will talk about that more next week because I think I've gone on long enough. So, with that, my friends, I thank you for your attention. I thank you for tuning in. If something that I said here was valuable or you liked it, send it to somebody else that it might help. I don't know. I like to get this out to as many people as I can, just cause. And yeah, other than that, I will see y'all next week. I hope y'all have a great week in space. Until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and as always, may the force be with you. All right, my friends. See you next time. Bye now.